So I saw the iPad Pro for the first time today. Before I get into it, I want to address a comment that somebody mentioned regarding how Windows... Actually, there were two comments. One of them essentially said that Windows isn't the virus haven that it used to be, that it is more secure. And I will acknowledge that. And then there was somebody else who mentioned that for very niche software, I believe this person said they were a physicist, that what they needed to do couldn't be handled on the iPad Pro, and I'll acknowledge that. But you have to look at it where I'm coming from. The software that I use, such as Voice Dream Writer and other pieces of software, such as the NLS Bard app, those are not available on Windows. And Windows being Windows, while it certainly is, more stable, I'm sure, you have to understand that I've been using Windows most of my childhood. And as Windows grew, so too did the bugs. And it wasn't anything, well, for a while it certainly was Microsoft. And the recent versions of Windows, especially Windows 7, they're great. And I have to stress, I'm not blaming Microsoft for this. But you have to take a look at the ecosystem. And I'm not talking about the software ecosystem, but the hardware ecosystem. Windows and Android have one thing in common, and that is, with the plethora of hardware and software combinations available, yes, they all run Windows, but you have different levels of bloatware. You've got the Microsoft Signature series, you've got different processors, you've got different graphics cards. All of this can play into how your overall user experience is going to be. It may be great. I will acknowledge that. Yes, it could be wonderful. But also, it could be a disaster. I recently watched a video on the Surface Pro 4 this morning from Giganoids in the UK. And Dave had explained that when he was using the Surface Pro,
5 o'clock p.m.
it took his system 5 hours to get updates. And during this time, he could not use his PC. He also made a similar mention that it took 8 hours to do a full restore of the system. It is unexpected issues like that that I'm definitely not comfortable dealing with. With the integration of the iPad Pro, the hardware, the software, building for niche markets, and I was actually reading an article on this saying that there are certain app vendors, the smaller ones in particular, who fear they wouldn't be able to make an ROI, return on investment, great enough to justify development for the iPad Pro. That's fine. I'll acknowledge that. But the software that I already use, Voice Dream, the NLS Bard app, Vision Assist, those apps would only be a boon on the iPad Pro. Bigger screen, better viewing area, bigger text. I actually was able to read. I didn't have to put the iPad up close to my face to read it. That's how wonderful the screen was. So let's get into it. Starting again with let's use that screen comment to get into it. Beautiful screen, easy for me to read, just as I expected. The weight, it's lightweight, but you have to hold it properly. And in this case, properly means preferably in landscape mode. It can be done in portrait, and I actually did hold it both hands in portrait mode. but it's not ideal. Which, to be honest, is perfectly fine for me, because putting something into landscape, particularly like data from academic research in a spreadsheet, and working with a literature review in a word processor, those are the kinds of tasks that are perfectly suited to landscape. So it really wasn't a problem. So the weight was comfortable. The screen was beautiful. The audio was incredible. Now, I made a mention that I used VoiceOver. The audio on the iPad Pro was so loud that apparently some people were staring at me as I was using it, because obviously they're not used to seeing somebody have the iPad read everything to them. Excuse me. But just in using it, I could tell that for me, it was the perfect fit. Now, video watching experience, top notch. And you're probably thinking, well, I'm pretty much sold. Yes, but that doesn't mean that there aren't some caveats. One advantage I will acknowledge for the Microsoft Surface Pro series of computers in the Windows environment is that the apps were more readily usable on the larger screen in terms of having more to work with. Now, in terms of the user experience, different story altogether. I still prefer the iPad for user experience. But in terms of usability at the moment, and I stress at the moment, that's a big asterisk, Microsoft is ahead. Now, I can only assume that the developers of the really big apps and the ones that are really going to be, useful on a bigger screen device like the iPad Pro, I'm sure that developers are already working on apps that will take advantage of the device. Now, I've tried typing on the on-screen keyboard. Wouldn't recommend it. In my case, I was glad that I knew Braille, because I was able to type on the Braille screen keyboard, and that experience was just wonderful. Any other caveats? Again, we go back to the fact that it's, for the moment, a bit of a software hit and miss. There are apps out there that are perfectly usable on the iPad Pro, but I noticed that they hadn't switched over their keyboard yet, which is really odd. Now again, because I use the Braille screen keyboard, it really wasn't a problem, but I could just see the inconsistency. Now, it might also be worth pointing out that the device was running a demonstration version of Apple's iOS. You weren't able to download any apps to the device. You could search for them, but you weren't able to download any apps to the device. In VoiceOver, you cannot activate the screen curtain in this demo mode. In fact, that's how I knew it was demo mode, because I did the gesture to activate the screen curtain, and it said to me, screen curtain not available in demo mode. So, if you acknowledge the fact that it was a demonstration version of iOS, and the developers, the device has only been out for a couple weeks. We have to give people time to work. So I would say give it a month or two and see what happens. One thing that I still have not experienced, that I'm practically dying to experience, is the smart keyboard. Because one of the things, the reason I want the iPad Pro, you heard me mention earlier about academic data and research. This is going to be my portable solution for note-taking and utilizing my classwork. And you're probably thinking, well, what about external storage? The university utilizes Google Drive. Google Drive is fully supported on iOS. I was able to upload screenshots from a Kindle book from one of my classes up to Google Drive onto my university account, no problem. It took a while, but I could get it done. And that to me is the iPad Pro's strong point. As somebody with specific usage needs that 90% of people don't have, the iPad Pro, in my personal view, is a perfect fit. Now back to the Smart Keyboard. I want to experience it. I've already experienced the typing on the MacBook, the 2015 super thin MacBook, the one that's got the USB-C port and the one that's even thinner than the MacBook Air. And that keyboard is usable. I'd like to see it have a little more travel. I believe from the reviews that I've seen that this does have more tactile feedback, but the thing that I like about it is the material that it's made of, and that is this fabric material. Now, I know a lot of people aren't going to like it, and I will admit that I do like the idea of Logitech's backlit keyboard. But I like the idea of longevity even better. This thing is supposed to be spill resistant, and I'd like to have something that I could use for 4 years without it breaking down. And then finally, we take a look at we go back real quick to the portability aspect of the device. Again, I lifted it up. When I lifted it up, it was feather light for what it was. And I'm not exaggerating. It really did feel, obviously it felt like there was something there, but it didn't feel like a brick. You know, it felt very lightweight. I could easily move it around in my hands. I could cradle it. I was cradling it in my arm. I could balance it on one hand while using my finger to navigate with VoiceOver with the other. I could use my thumbs on both sides to navigate with VoiceOver. And the only time that my arm did get tired was trying to hold the device in one hand. Everybody has recommended that you do not do that, and I will back that up. Okay? If you need to hold it in one hand, again, just cradle it under your arm. In my case, it went from my fingers all the way back to my elbow, and it was incredibly comfortable. It felt very much like my MacBook Air because I've carried it that way. I've carried the MacBook Air that way a lot. So it felt very much like my MacBook Air. It was no different. When I balanced it, when I rested it on the palm of my hand, it didn't feel like it was about to fall out of my hand. You know, it was just an overall fantastic experience. The video, the speakers, not just for video, but also for VoiceOver, for music. This is just an incredible tablet, and I think that given time, it can really be something. Me personally, I'm sold. What do you guys think? Thank you for watching. Comments are welcome, and have a nice day.